Thanks very much for joining us today for this webinar, all about effective animation for learning. So I'm Matt, and I'm joined here by my colleague Matt Lineker as well. And hopefully everyone's joined us who's now going to start. So we're going to get started. So just in case there's any confusion, you know, it's got my name here and it's got a picture. That isn't me. This is me here, in case you need to visualize who's talking. So I'm visual design lead here at Totra. I work on marketing projects for the company and also a lot of content and materials for the Totra community and academy. I'll come to that in a second. But so about me, I'm a designer and illustrator, and I've worked on lots of e-learning projects in the past for different brands, like ice cream brands and communications firms and police forces. Since I've been at Totra, which is about 2.5 years now, we've been producing more and more animations in-house, particularly for the academy, but also to do things like promote events and promote our sector spaces. You might have seen them online here and there. So like I said, the community and the academy, I'm going to talk about those a lot because a lot of the stuff we do is for them. For those of you that don't know, the community and the academy is the place to go and talk about Totra, about your experience of Totra, learn new things about Totra, our learning platform, and it's a place where you'll probably come across a lot of the animations that we see today. I'll show little snippets of animations. They've all come from there generally. And if you haven't signed up, please do. It's free. The URL is totra.community, and you'll see us in and about there on the forums. So, agenda, what we're going to cover today. The purpose of this webinar is to help you in the creation of animations for learning and to give you some things to think about. Perhaps the next time you're thinking about using animation, you might be involved in content creation at your company, at your firm. You might commission different agencies to create animations for you. Or at the other end of the scale, you might be a kind of one-person production house that does absolutely everything. So we're going to go through today, firstly, why might you use animation for learning? So we'll bring up some considerations there. Then we'll look at scripting and animation, look at storyboarding and animation, then some aspects of creating it, and then a few considerations like accessibility and things like that. And then we'll do a quick recap at the end. So a little bit of housekeeping, shouldn't be longer than about 40 minutes, hopefully. We'll have a few opportunities for questions throughout. So if you've got a question, put it into the chat, and then we can see it and we can read it out, some of them, give them an answer. If I don't have the answer, then we can, I can email you separately perhaps or something like that. But we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So in case you have to pop out or anything for a few minutes, maybe you've got to run into a meeting or something, this webinar will be recorded and we'll put it up on the community afterwards. So you'll be able to view it if there's a bit that you miss or there's maybe something you want to go over. So perhaps we should start with a question just now, actually. So are you thinking of using an animation in an upcoming project maybe? I'm going to launch that as a quick poll. So hopefully you can all see this poll that's come up. Great, we're getting loads of answers already. This is fab. So far, yes is winning. Maybe is close behind. We've got 1 no so far. But that's really interesting to see that a lot of you are thinking of using animation. Great to hear that you've joined us on this webinar. That's ideal. Don't worry if you don't know how to use After Effects or Cinema 4D or Maya or whatever the kind of the latest industry standard or the thing making a splash is software-wise. We're not going to go into kind of detail about specifically how you make things move on the X and Y axis or anything like that. There are plenty of online courses about things like that, about animation software, and different people use different things. dependent on what they want to do. You know, different people, different needs. So instead, we're going to be tackling it at sort of a more higher level overview, if you know what I mean by that. As in, we're going to be thinking about the considerations and what we can do to make animation more effective, and especially when it comes to learning, because that's what we do here at Totara. So thanks very much for taking part in the poll. I can see that yes, it's a resounding yes and maybe, and a couple of no's. So I'm going to end that. Thanks very much. I will actually share the results with you because we can do that. Great. So thanks for taking part in that question. So first thing on the agenda, why use animation for learning? There are kind of lots and lots of different reasons you could use animation for learning, but there are three things that animation does quite well. And you've got a choice when you've got to create a material that's got to get something across to someone. You've got a choice. You could do like a kind of a PDF that you've laid out really well. You could make a piece of SCORM content. But animation, like I say, is particularly good for three things. Those things being, I'm going to show you a quick little example here from an Academy video. So this here is explaining an abstract, a new concept to an audience. So we're using graphics, these icons here, with narration as well, which I've muted just now, so as you don't have two of me talking, to show an abstract concept that is new to people, and animation can be pretty good at doing that. It's also good for bringing a process to life. So one thing we do in the Academy is we use a lot of icons with voiceover, like I say, that mean that it's kind of giving things a bit more context. It makes people think about them. And we use this scenario style as well, where we use these cartoon illustrations of people to give an example of how Totara Learn could be used in real life. And it's good to kind of put faces to names, really, not just say, Kyle does this as a case study. Instead, we show Kyle. And then the third thing that it does is it's good at kind of building new knowledge, introducing new things to people that might be quite complex. So this is actually quite a complex diagram, but because it's taken in kind of bite-sized chunks and you're seeing it bit by bit, it might be a little bit easier to digest. So I'm just going to scrub through this, which will be quite scary. But here we've got all these different contexts. This is about setting up context throughout a Totara Learn site. And that, I mean, that sounds scary to me, and I know quite a bit about Totara Learn, but it's good at showing bits and pieces in context, ironically, next to one another. So that's three things that animation can be good for. We create these animations and they're part of courses that are on the Totara Academy. So here's one of our animations in situ on a course page. There you can see it's in the main kind of central column of the site, and you've got all your YouTube controls there as well. I'll go into that a little bit later on about how you can get that sort of thing on your own version of Totara Learn. But before that, next, so we've been talking about why you might use animation. You've decided to use animation. What do you need to consider? So I'm going to go through a few things you might want to consider when putting it together. So it might be a good idea when you're starting off to produce your animation to think about these 4 points here. Ask yourself these questions. Firstly, what is the purpose of your animation? What's it got to do? Has it got to entertain people? Maybe you're marketing a product to someone. Maybe it's part of a wider kind of set of learning, like the kind of thing we do here at the Academy. Or maybe it's a kind of mixture of all those and something in between. So it's got to kind of serve a lot of purposes. One thing that a lot of you might work in is learning objectives. So what do people need to have learned by the end of the animation? What's the kind of the key piece of information you're getting across? Do they need to do something as a result? Is there a call to action at the end? And the next thing you might want to think about is the length of your animation. You probably want to keep it short and punchy. You don't want to go on for hours and hours because you probably don't have, I don't know, a Pixar's budget to start with. But you probably want to keep it short because people's attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. But yeah, you're all still listening. That's good. So do consider people's attention spans. Do they have to watch your video? I know that some people in e-learning, they create videos that people have to watch. They have to tick a box or achieve a requirement to continue doing their jobs. Do you have that sort of captive audience? And talking about audiences, who are you talking to? Do consider them, because they're the most important people, really. Where are they watching your video? Are they watching your video on their mobile phone? Are they a delivery driver? Do they only have access to perhaps the learning content or your video on a tablet or handset maybe? So that's all things that it's really good to consider when you, at the beginning of your animation, when you start creating it, really. So next thing on the agenda was script. So writing your script. This is generally done by, well, a learning designer a lot of the time, but a lot of people are involved in creating scripts. For this part of this webinar, I did speak to Head of Community Rachel Griffiths-Boys, because I thought it would be a good idea to get her take on it, because she's produced a lot of scripts for our Academy content, for example. So some of the animations that myself and my colleagues have made, Rachel and Matt Lineker as well have written them, so it's been good to get their take on it as well. So like I say, a lot of our demo videos and animations, they're scripted by a learning designer, and that's really because they can do things like talk to subject matter experts about what the video has to get across. And perhaps your animation is going to have narration or text on screen. It probably will. You wouldn't just have excuse me, you wouldn't just have solely illustrations as an animation. If you've got to get a lot across, it would be a lot quicker to have either someone talking over it, narration, voiceover, VO as I call it a lot of the time, or some text on screen, either as subtitles or maybe as text on screen that's kind of moving in a kinetic type of way, really dynamically. Either way, you'll want to script what the narrator is going to say or what the text is going to be on screen. And then you'll want to start thinking about what's happening on screen at the same time too. So here you can see this is actually this is taken from a Word document that we create our scripts in. So there's narration on the left and then suggestions for visuals on the right. And generally we work together on those with the person that's written the script as well. So there's a little taster of that. When you're writing narration, it's probably quite good to keep it natural. Generally animations tend to be less formal rather than a kind of a Word document or a downloadable PDF that's just all black and white text. Generally animations are slightly more on the fun side. Perhaps the narration should therefore be a bit more friendly. Like as an example, it's natural to say, let's look at an example, rather than let us inspect an example, like that. Just language like running words together. I know I'm being a little bit extreme with my example there, but just like let's instead of let us. Things like that can kind of help narration sound a bit more natural. You might want to try reading it out loud, see what it sounds like, see what works. You don't want to maybe be too informal. If we're going to go with that footwear analogy, you don't want to sound too odd. You maybe don't want to use too much slang and things like that. But when I was talking about reading it out, it might be a good idea to think about how long your script is going to be, how long the narration is going to take. That might form how long your animation is going to be. So if you've got 300 words, a rough estimate we use here is that 150 words takes about a minute. So if you have 300 words, that'll take 2 minutes. Perhaps your animation is going to be 2.5 minutes then. So that's an estimate we use here. But the best thing to do is to time yourself saying it, reading it out loud. It might seem a bit odd. People do things like that. Find a room and read it out to yourself, because it's the best indicator of how long your animation is going to last. And you'll also need to add breaks between sentences for pauses and transitions in the visuals on screen. So do pause between sentences, like I perhaps need to right now. But it will really help you when you think about how long it's going to be, because so often in the past places I've worked, they've said, oh, we need a 30-second animation, and then the script has been War and Peace, basically. So next up, we did talk about the audience a little bit in those 4 icons I showed earlier, but do consider your audience when it comes to what you're writing, what your narration is going to be. Perhaps you have non-native English speakers, if you're doing an animation in English, that is, do try and avoid colloquialisms. You don't want to use loads and loads of slang. You don't want to use loads of just loads of phrases that people might not get if you've got a global audience. Perhaps you work for a company that is creating a video that's got to be produced, that's got to be watched around the world by people in different areas of the world. You don't want to kind of use odd phrases that they're just not going to understand. The latest lingo. There you go, lingo, there's one. But then kind of gauge it and see what your audience is like, perhaps. See what works with your colleagues. And so again, there's another draft script from the Academy. The bit, as I've said before, so the bit on the left is the script, and then the bit on the right is going to take us nicely to our next section. But that's kind of considerations for storyboarding. What are the visuals going to be? As well as starting with the script on the left, we've got to start thinking about what is going to accompany the words. So that'll help when it comes to storyboarding. But before that, perhaps we should take a quick pause and ask if there are any questions at this stage. Matt,
Hi, Matt. So got a couple of questions coming so far. Raoul wanted to know, I'm not sure if you can touch on this later, which tools do you use to create animations?
Yes, I will cover that actually shortly, Raoul and Matt. Yeah, so do bear with us. Stick with us.
So Christine's asking a good, interesting question as well. So would you have any examples of when animation is not a good fit? She talks about when it is a good fit.
That's a great question. That's quite tough. I suppose if it's got to be something extremely formal, you wouldn't want to use an animation to tell people they were going to be made redundant, perhaps. There's a good example. Maybe very unlikely, but who knows, perhaps in a boardroom somewhere around the globe right now, someone is proffering that as an idea. Perhaps they're going, oh, how about an animation with a lovely, friendly, cuddly character telling them they've been made redundant? I'm being a bit flippant and extreme, but I think your question is a valid one. That's a really good one. Perhaps just consider the tone of voice, really, of an animation. You can be quite serious with animation, but perhaps it might not be best if it's something quite serious like that. Or equally, you might have a consideration to make, like, people don't have internet access, or people can't listen to, can't access YouTube. Perhaps you're producing some learning for a company that their company block access to YouTube or access to any sort of video. So that might be another way to consider it.
Can I jump in on that one? Just another
point. Sure, yeah.
So I would also say, is it patronizing to create an animation? So for example, is the information too simple? So often when we write scripts, we do it because something is a little bit complicated and it needs to be shown in a different way just to give a different perspective on something. If it's quite simplistic, I probably wouldn't write a script that Matt would then turn into an animation because people already understand it. Would a short amount of text work in place of that? So just thinking, if it's patronizing to create an animation, you wouldn't tell someone how to do shopping, for example. It's too simple.
Absolutely. I'm quite lucky in that way that people have already considered whether the subject or the kind of the matter that's going to be produced in the animation is suitable for animation or not already. So that's a really good question, actually. So thanks for asking that. Are there any more at this stage?
Chris is just asking if there's any useful tools for scripting. I can answer that one just because.
Well, yeah, I know that you use Grammarly, for example, just to check everything immediately.
So I use Microsoft Word mostly, or Pages on Mac, just to write a script. So any word processing document. And then as Matt says, I use an extension Grammarly just to check all my grammar, just to make sure that's okay.
There are odd bits of free software that kind of pitch themselves as being really good for script writers, like movie makers, that then have sections where you can produce visuals quite easily, but they tend to be a little bit tough to use, and then you have to have no one else can open them and things like that. So in the end, perhaps just using a word processor is best. Stick to that.
And also just having those experts to speak to you, that's the big thing, isn't it? Having the actual information itself is the hardest thing, rather than a tool for writing a script. I think, just having those people on hand. Another question from Christine: should you consider sound and music? I know you're going to come back to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's coming up in a little while. So yeah, that's one of the things on the penultimate bullet point that we had earlier. Yeah, that's in the things to consider. But yeah, we'll talk about sound definitely.
Okay, I think that's all the questions for now, Matt. So
great, brilliant. Okay, well, thanks for that, guys. We'll crack on here. So the next thing we're going to talk about is storyboarding. So here is, so here's a really simple storyboard, for example, that I've created in Adobe Illustrator of something growing. You're going to want to start marrying up visuals with your script in a storyboard, and it's a really key stage in production of your animation because it's the time that you're going to plan what happens on screen. So here's an example of a storyboard, the kind of storyboard that we produce for Academy animations. So this one's about appraisals. That's 6 shots there. We split them into kind of shots. We call them shots, or sometimes people say slides. And we've got this landscape A4, and we go left to right like you read in 2 rows like that. We've got a bit of text that's the script, and then beneath it, a little bit smaller, we've got some description of what's going on screen. But I'll elaborate on that shortly. Here it is in Adobe InDesign, warts and all. That's what I see when I'm putting it together in Adobe InDesign. I find that really useful for putting together an animation storyboard because you just got a lot of control over it. But you can easily do something similar in Microsoft Word. You might not have kind of like that snazzy background, for example, but it'll do the job just as well. So that it's all put together in InDesign, but then I use Illustrator and Photoshop to create the visuals for the storyboard. But sometimes the storyboards that we make consist of a lot of pencil sketches as well. So here you can see those are some of the same characters, and this is how they started, as just rough pencil sketches. And at times I put those in the storyboard because it's quicker and easier, and we need to kind of see what we're doing first. And then they might get worked up to this kind of style a little bit later at some point, maybe when we make some amendments to the storyboard or we've spent some time creating the assets for the animation. So if you do use these kind of pencil sketches like this, make sure that you also produce a sketch that's indicative of what the final artwork, what the final animation would look like, because someone could look at that and think that the whole animation is going to be rough and grungy and sketchy, and they might not like that. They might think, that's not very professional, but they might kind of take it at face value. So do make that clear and maybe include one of those as well and point that out, because it really works for me doing these quick pencil sketches, but sometimes other people kind of can't imagine what the finished product would look like. And that's what this storyboard really is for. It's really for indicating what the animation is going to look like. And like I was saying, when you look at each shot there, you've got the shot number, you've got the script there, that's the piece of narration, the piece of voiceover there in the larger type, and then smaller in grey is the description of what's going on screen. Because we've got voiceover in all of our Academy animations, so I've got that relevant segment of the narration, and I generally cut it into sentences for the voiceover. Well, for the storyboard, I cut each sentence as one shot, and that helps make sure that we've got kind of regular movement, and you don't end up with one visual that's on screen for a good 90 seconds, 2 minutes maybe, as someone reads out a paragraph. You don't really want long periods of inactivity on screen, or someone might think that there's an issue, their internet connection's gone, something's buffering. So it helps kind of keep things moving visually. So you might think, why do I need a storyboard for my animation? Doesn't this seem like kind of doing a lot of work for the sake of it? But it's really helpful to help, like I said, kind of help people visualize everything, help stakeholders, or perhaps the people that are paying for the animation, the people that are commissioning the animation, make sure that they are kind of happy with how it looks. It's going to indicate how the animation is going to turn out. So this is a way that you can kind of get sign off on your animation project before you've started to produce it, and it will save time in making changes at this planning stage rather than once you've created the entire thing. It's all been recorded, animated, finalized, uploaded. Perhaps it's already been promoted, and then you've got to make a change because someone hadn't kind of read the script, but they may well have looked at a storyboard with visuals in it. So that's kind of me digging up the case for storyboards in a nutshell. So there you go, big tick. Everyone signed it off, so now you can go ahead to production. When you're creating your storyboard, you can kind of include a lot of considerations of what you're going to do with your animation. You might want to break your animation up into sections or segments, so as it kind of looks a little bit different throughout, so as it's not just one image of one ball bouncing up and down for 2 minutes or something like that. So sections or segments that you might want to include might be an introduction, or include some introductions to your animations. We stick to a clear introduction at the beginning of our Academy animations. So, for example, here's another storyboard for a competencies animation. We've got a title card at the start of the animation, and generally the first line of voiceover tells people what it's about. So here, competencies and measurable skills. And having this title card with the title in it, it helps viewers know that they're watching the right animation to start with, and that they know what the animation is going to be about. So it kind of sets their what's the right word? It sets their expectations really, and it makes sure that they know, okay, right, competencies, settle in, watch it. Recaps as well is a good thing to include. So we have generally recaps at the end of a lot of our longer Academy animations. Perhaps a lot of information has been introduced, and it'd help just to remind people of it, go over it quickly again, summarize the key points. Sometimes we repeat sections of footage as well. So if we've spent quite a while doing a really elaborate composition of things moving, we might repeat it again just to remind them, so then they're reminded visually as well as by the voiceover as well. Generally, repeating it helps people remember. So there we've got our we've got about 4 things being reminded at the end there, recapped, and then we've got an end card as well there. So we use different visual styles in our Academy and community and generally tutorial animations. You might use a certain style across multiple videos. We've got this scenario style here. So I'll quickly play a little bit of that. You might have seen this teaser animation here, but this is me putting together one of these illustrations of a person that we use for a scenario. So the reason we do this scenario style of illustration is because we're giving a face to a fictional scenario. So we say, oh, Mary and Kyle, they work at this shop. They're using Totoland to deliver some training. Kyle does X, Mary does Y. It's made up, but we want to give it a face and help people to understand it really. So I do these illustrations in Illustrator. This is of Kyle there. And then we use those to kind of to make sure that people know that they're not real examples as well. Because if we showed photos of people might think, oh, that's a real life example of Totoland being used out in the wild, and that might be a little bit misleading. So instead, the illustrations work, so people then know through familiarity that they're seeing something that's kind of made up, basically, to put it a better way. And then the end of your animation, you probably want to mark that it is the end of your animation, so as people don't think that your website's broken and it's not showing the animation properly, or that their internet's down again. So we use this closing card. I think you saw it a couple of minutes ago, but at the very end of the animation, we have this Totoro.academy logo, animate in, and these colored blocks, and that shows that it's the end of the animation. I think we also make the music go up a little bit at the end as well. I'll talk a bit more about music in a while, but that helps to indicate to people that it is the end. When you're putting text on screen, do bear in mind that people are watching a lot of things on tablets and mobiles, so don't have lots of really small detailed writing. We do have a kind of a safe area, a text safe area when you're doing an animation. This is from Illustrator, but if you're doing a a standard HD 1920 by 1080 pixels. If you adhere to these two sets of lines here, you can see that text is actually almost in the danger zone. So you'd want to move that in, for example. So regarding text appearing on screen, having text appear as mentioned helps hammer home a few points, but don't do it too much. People will just end up checking out if every word is on screen as well as in the voiceover, like an awful PowerPoint presentation where the presenter just reads the paragraphs of text on their slides like this. We've all seen a PowerPoint presentation like that. It's not so great to do that. So use text sparingly, especially if you're going to be translating your animation later on. You might have lots of text and then you've got a huge job really to translate that all and change it later on. And different languages take up different amounts of space. So that might be quite a tough one. So to recap again, get your storyboard reviewed and get your peers to review it as well. Get other people in your company. Is the content of your video pitched at the right level for your learners? Do you need to be more specific, or actually maybe you're being too specific? Here with your storyboard, people can see everything and not just the script in isolation. So very quickly, did we have any questions just now?
So a couple more questions. So Raoul's asking again, what are the formats of animations that can be supported by Totoro? So how do we upload animations into courses when we do them?
I'm going to cover that shortly, Rahul, actually. But that is a great question. Thank you so much for asking.
So then Andrew's also asking an interesting question, which I've had some time to think about. I'm going to present it to you fresh.
Go for it.
So our learning environment is generally in a busy factory environment where audio is often drowned out by ambient noise. Also, the learning they create is designed for a global audience, which can be accessed by 5 or 6 different languages. So what tips would you have to easily convey instructions where on-screen words and audio are not possible?
Oh, that's tough. That's a really good kind of user case of a kind of difficult situation that you've got to cater for. I suppose using a lot of icons would be good. I suppose it depends on the level of detail, really, whether you're doing something incredibly intricate that needs lots of descriptive words or not. If it's kind of like pull this, move this, you could do a lot of icons and moving diagrams showing what's happening. Maybe if it's people doing things with their hands, show illustrations or even video of the hand doing that thing, whether it's turning a lever. I might be being a little bit simplistic here and thinking that all they do is move levers, but what did you say? It's a busy factory environment. But it's a great case where the audio is drowned out and you can't show that much text because you've got 5 or 6 different languages going on. Could you include subtitles in different languages, perhaps, dependent on how you're hosting the video? Because there is the option on YouTube, for example, I think, to have several different subtitles languages. Like when you're watching a DVD and you can't hear it, and you find out that, oh, they've got Hungarian on this DVD. Great, I'll watch it in Hungarian. But maybe you need to watch this training in Hungarian. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure what else I can say other than that.
You could also think if is the animation appearing in isolation or is it part of a course? So if it's part of a course, could there be text again before the animation supporting what the animation is trying to show in the relevant native language? So perhaps you introduce the animation with text that really helps to identify and display it. So things don't exist in isolation, do they? They're part of a package of information and material. I think that's really the key point. I wouldn't be able to write the script very easily like that. But as people are suggesting here as well, and Matt suggested, adding subtitles, and YouTube, I think YouTube automatically subtitles things sometimes as well.
They can make auto ones. Sometimes they're a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a possibility. You're right about the isolation thing, that generally these videos are shown in context. And then there's probably some assumed knowledge that people already know how to turn this machine on, for example, that you can build on. Oh yeah, I see Richard suggested SRT files, for example. Yeah, that's actually something we do for our videos, but we don't do it for lots of different languages, but that is something you could do.
Yeah, and Christine's suggesting that you could use it in combination with an interactive video as well. So yeah, another idea there to check it with questions at the end. That's a good point. That you could even have a small tutor quiz after the animation to check that understanding is there. And if not, you could perhaps add more text again. So it doesn't always have to be an animation by itself, I think, is the main point.
Yeah, that was the phrase. Blended learning is like the kind of the key phrase that you hear a lot.
But as Matt says as well, like, icons are really useful.
Yeah, especially you see some really bad icons sometimes there, like on a fridge. You think, is that a fridge? But yeah,
clear icons.
Clear icons. Yeah. Thanks for all those questions, guys. That's really good to see people making suggestions in response as well. But if you have a question kind of hit you in a few hours and you wish you'd asked it, you can always email me at the end. I'm happy to help with things like that. So next up, we're going to talk about creating your animation. So someone asked earlier about the tools that I might use or that we use here at Totara. There are lots of free tools available online. I'm sure if you do a well-known search engine search, you might find numerous products that you could use to put an animation together. Some of you might work with some of these tools already, or you might work for the companies that produce these sorts of tools. Generally, kind of content creators will have programs that they prefer, that they generally go back to for whatever reason. So I'm not going to talk about lots of different animation software so much, but I'll tell you the software we tend to use. So to answer your question earlier, Raoul, we use After Effects. We've got lots of control over it. There's nothing, you can be as kind of as detailed as you like. There are some automated things that might work quite well, and there are some things that you can really kind of drill down into the detail and make it move precisely how you'd like it to. We've also started using Cinema 4D for a few small segments. For those of you that have already got After Effects in Adobe Creative Cloud, there's a kind of light free version of Cinema 4D within it, and that's all we use, and it kind of does the job of adding a little bit of 3D. And then for artwork that we create, generally we're setting things up in Photoshop and Illustrator files, and they'll be layered, for example, so as we can do things like move eyes or move arms, or different sections of diagrams can move independently. So perhaps you work with a creative agency, or you're the person using these sorts of programs yourself. If you are working with a creative agency, perhaps there's more of an FYI on how they may do things and put an animation together. A point to make when you're putting your animation together is it's a great idea to treat each of your shots separately. So you saw earlier on my storyboard, I had lots of separate shots. If you kind of treat them as separate compositions, you can easily change the gaps between them, like maybe you need a bigger pause. And then you can reorder them as well. You might get a bit of feedback that's make shots 3 to 6 much later in the animation, for example. You probably can't see that much detail there, but here we've got all these green strips there. They're all different shots. So you can see shot 4 to 16, shot 2 to 3, things like that. So they're all the different shots, and I move those around depending on feedback, really. It's much easier to rejig them than have to redo everything. So we've talked about animation, but what about voiceover? I was talking a lot about narration and VO. We do all of our voiceover in-house generally. There are a few of us here at Totara who are reluctantly happy enough to do this. We have a decent microphone, and we use some open source software that's called Audacity to record and clean up the sound. So if you watch any of the Totara Academy videos, you're hearing some of us who are here in the office in Brighton, and sometimes people who are in the New Zealand office as well, and in the US. So if you've got a good enough microphone, and you just need to find a quiet room, really, you'll get a decent enough result. Avoid things like pops and deep inhalations. Sometimes I have to kind of cut out a lot of like this in between shots, and like when people talk like this, like they're angry at their face. So yeah, we use Audacity to record the voiceover and clean that up. One of you asked earlier about music. So we have a backing track, a sound bed to our animations, and it really helps hide any hisses or background noise that we might have in the voiceover. If you do use music, please do make sure that you have the rights to use the music. I doubt that perhaps the Black Eyed Peas or, you know, Queen or the Pet Shop Boys, I doubt that they're really going to be in your budget, I'm afraid to say. But do remember, copyright is really important. So you've got to make sure you're allowed to use that track. There are plenty of free stock music sites, or there are some that charge very, very low fees. And copyright also applies to imagery as well. So you might be using a lot of imagery in your animation, existing imagery off the internet. You've just got to make sure that when you're sourcing imagery, you're using a reputable stock site, whether it's free or subscription based, and that you're crediting it if you need to credit it, that sort of thing. Because if your animation's out in the world, people can find that, and if it wouldn't be great to be seen to be using things that you don't have the rights to. And then transitions as well, that's a good thing to consider. Do things enlarge into view? Do things minimize at the end of shots? Do they slide in? You can do some of these things even just in PowerPoint, but they're a good thing to consider, hopefully at storyboard stage. A brief section here on accessibility. Do consider the colors you're using when you're putting an animation together. Obviously, some of these color combinations are easier to view than others. So consider maybe not using yellow on a white background, for example. That's something we do with a lot of our materials here at the Academy, because they've got to be accessible to people with different sight capabilities, really. Text on screen, make sure that you adhere to that text safe area that I showed you earlier. And it's a great idea to provide an alternative transcript. Perhaps people want to refer later on to the script, or there's lots of technical detail. You could create a transcript PDF that people could refer to later. So this is one of the PDFs that we create. There's a transcript for Academy animations. This here is where you can access it. We've always got this little bit here. There you go. Beneath the animation there, you can click on that to get the PDF. So we've been talking already, thanks to some of you guys, your questions and other people's suggestions about closed captions for narration. So I think Rich mentioned, yeah, an SRT file, you can upload that to YouTube. It can be automatically done, like Matt Lineker mentioned as well. It just really helps because perhaps people don't have headphones, perhaps people even just don't have sound or can't use sound for whatever reason. It's really helpful. Or maybe they're not a native English speaker and they'd like to see it written down as well as hear it. So back in After Effects, you've created your artwork, you've made it all move, you've set up the shots, you've recorded your voiceover, you've got a backing track, you've put it all together. So we use After Effects, then we export it as an MP4. We use a review tool, an animation review tool internally. So we will put it up on one of these and people can provide feedback online, different people in the company. And when you give a bit of feedback, the piece of feedback gets anchored to the point in time that's relevant. So it's really helpful to avoid ambiguous comments like that bit early on, or about halfway through, or you know, the bit with the yellow, or the bit with the hand, or whatever. And it's really helpful to then get the feedback at the right point, and then you know, yep, I'm going to action that, or no, I'm going to respond to that and justify it. So once it's all finished, we upload our animations to YouTube, and then we share the embed code and put that into our courses on the Totoro Academy. So there it is on YouTube. And here is what we do. We've got here a label in Totoro Learn, and you see there's a bit of code there that we use, HTML there, that it kind of stops the suggested videos happening at the end. So then you don't get kind of taken off Totoro Learn because you see a cat video you'd like to watch or something like that. So you could put it on YouTube like we do. There are other ways that you can upload a video directly to Totoro Learn, to your instance of Totoro Learn. We do it this way because we've just got the most control around it like this. That code also helps the video respond as well to larger and smaller window sizes as well. So having done all of this, you've made your animation. Are people watching your videos? Well, in the Academy, we know people are taking up courses and we know people are passing them, but perhaps your video isn't as part of a course and you'd like to know all about it. We can see that YouTube here helps take a lot of guesswork out of who's watching your video. So this is from YouTube Studio. This is the kind of analytics that you can get on the videos that you've uploaded. So we can see these viewing stats, and I've got some help from my colleague Jordan here to access these graphs, and it shows our retention rates and who's viewing them and things like that. Well, not so much who's viewing them, but it's showing us when they're watching it, how long they're watching it for, whether they drop out at certain points. This is a good example here of the kind of information you can get. You can see early on there's a bit of a kind of a peak at about 10 seconds in. Now that's either because people are rewatching a bit or because they're kind of scrubbing through the title card animation at the beginning. And so we can see these little peaks here and there that are people who are looking at the odd bit here and there. YouTube's actually done a lot of the work for me here because it's got this nice little diagram here that shows if you've got a nice flat line here, which this is looking quite nice and flat throughout, that means that people are watching it from start to finish. We don't have complete control as to whether people kind of have to leave or have to stop watching the video, but that's quite a flat line, which is good to see. There's no gradual decline. There are the odd peaks. There aren't too many troughs, which is good. And there's no sudden drop off. It's not like people suddenly start dropping off at halfway through because they've found what they wanted out of this video and now they don't want to watch the rest. It's something to consider to see how effective your animation is, because perhaps you can't see if people have completed the course, but you want to see how well your animation is doing. So here, we actually did a survey as part of the Academy and community, and we included a question about animation. So here you can see 73% of learners rated the animations as good as or excellent. Landslide, that's great. 0% poor, 0% terrible. So we're pretty happy with that here, but we could always do better because some people are just saying it's okay. So we could look back at some of these graphs and stats and see what we want to do. Excuse me. See what we want to do to improve our animations in the future. So to recap on the kinds of things that we've covered today in the webinar, we've covered what animation is suitable for. We've considered some aspects of scripting, kind of ways that you want to approach that. We've spent quite a significant amount of time on storyboarding, because that really is key to pairing up visuals with your voiceover, working out exactly what's going to happen in your animation. We've covered a few aspects of the production of your animation and included the tools that we use and a few tips and tricks there. And then we've just finally covered how you can see how your animation's doing, whether you upload it to YouTube or whether you do want to commission a survey like we did there to find out what viewers are thinking about your animation. So here's a blog post I wrote, I think last year, or even longer, that might be suitable for some of you guys to have a look at, that covers a few of the things that we've spoken about today. So do go and have a look at that. We can make sure that you're emailed that after the webinar if you'd like. But other than that, just thanks very much for joining us today and listening to the webinar. My email address is there. If you've got any questions that you'd rather email, you're welcome to. But before that, does anyone have any questions?
So Christine's asking about clients, really, because obviously we all often have to work with clients, and she'd like to know, how long does it take to create an animation, roughly?
Well, that really depends. That's a really good question, because it is actually one that I get asked a lot, and it really, there is no easy answer. Like, you could say how long's a piece of string. It really depends on the level of detail that your animation is going into, whether the process you're using kind of is quite involved or not. We generally have a kind of a metric we use here at the for Academy videos. We say that to storyboard it and create all the illustrated assets takes I think it's a certain number of days or hours, and then we say for every minute of animation, it takes, I think, a certain number of days or hours. So we have this kind of equation that I'll then think, okay, I'll look at the script, I'll see what's required, and then give an estimate. So it might be good to kind of come up with a way to kind of deduce how long it's going to take to originate artwork, and then how long it's going to take to animate things. But it really varies on the complexity of your animation. If you're doing something that's in 3D and you've got to render it, it might take a long time to render. Or you might be doing something that's using kind of automated preset things in After Effects, or even PowerPoint or something like that, that you're able to harness the tools and use it really quickly to get something looking decent. So perhaps try one out, and then you can give a more accurate estimate.
I think also in terms of scripting, it depends on how complex the subject matter is as well. So if you've scoped out your course, or if you're just doing an isolated animation, then all the background reading and the context as to why you need that animation takes time as well. So something to think about there.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I don't have to consider that, because you guys have generally already done all of that, which is good.
So that can be really quick, or it can be really slow depending on the subject.
Yeah, for sure.
So Chris is asking, can you give access to an image of your safe text area? It would be useful to overlay on a computer to check the text is in the right place.
Yeah, sure. That's just come from Adobe Illustrator. That's a preset thing, but yeah, I can find that and wing it to you. Drop us an email. No problem.
Yeah, Chris, if you just email Matt afterwards, we'll be able to send that to you. Andrew's saying they loves the feedback tool. Is this available anywhere? You sure which one that was?
Oh yes, that was a slide earlier on. That's something. I think it's an Articulate thing. I can find out. Would you mind dropping me an email asking that, and I can find out from my colleagues and let you know?
So Andrew, yeah, if you could follow that up with an email as well, that'd be great. Simon's asking, how do you create animated GIFs?
I generally use Photoshop.
Okay, email on screen.
Yeah, sure. I generally use Photoshop to make animated GIFs. If you go up to View and Timeline, you then get a timeline that you can create shots from and move different layers around.
So just on that as well, if you really are pressed for time, or if Matt's got lots on, if it's something that doesn't require animation per se, but just actually a screen capture, there are quite a lot of tools that you can use independently now as well. So that Giphy capture, for example, you can make a very short GIF without having to ask an animator. But if you're creating something from scratch that doesn't have a screen, then that's when it'd have to be a short animation, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I've immediately gone to production, not what you could do alternatively. Yeah.
So, okay. Next question: how do you change the size of the video in the Totoro course?
Change the size of the video. Well, as included in the slides earlier, we use a bit of code to HTML that I think it's Bootstrap.
Yeah,
that's included. I'm going to go back and find it quickly and get it up on screen. That we so that's all HTML in a label, which is a kind of activity that you can put on your course page. So that bit of code there makes the video window responsive within the course page.
So this webinar will be available afterwards as well. So the recording will be available online, so you can go back and have a look at that in more detail and pause it on here as well if you need to.
But if that doesn't answer your question, do feel free to drop me an email and perhaps elaborate if that's not suitable.
Jonathan asked, I missed how to stop suggested videos. Could you cover that again, please?
Oh yeah, that's on screen as well right now. Part of that stops the suggested videos. I couldn't tell you exactly which part, but it's in there.
So that, again, our colleague Jordan helped with that through some of the Bootstrap, so you can come back to that if you want to post. These are really good questions for community forums as well, and we can come in and answer these in the forums. But also, it's good to get other people to know these answers. So yeah, feel free to post that in the community forum as well. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have. Does anyone have any other questions before we go? Thanks, Chris, for replying to that as well, saying that what the answer is.
Oh, Rel-O, yeah.
Rel-O stops the suggested videos.
Classic Rel-O.
It's good. Okay, does anyone have any further questions for Matt?
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for your time today, guys. I hope that was helpful. Like I said, if you've got any other questions, feel free to drop us an email. But thanks for your time today. Cheers.